And yeah, so I'm very happy to join you all. I don't know if I've met many of you yet, but hopefully at some point in person we'll all get to mingle at some point. And yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm going to share a presentation with you all tonight called Beekeepers United. And you can hear my cat meowing in the background. So hopefully my daughter will get him his late night snack because he's already had dinner. Yeah, and I'll start. I have a little 3-minute video that kind of introduces who I am and where I come from and how that plays a role in my career path, I should say, and in my efforts. So I'll save my introduction for that, and then I'll kind of break it down and talk a little bit more about this concept of Beekeepers United, right? Which is something that, despite our differences, our political beliefs, our racial background makeup, our cultural backgrounds, all of that, our fascination with bees is really what can bring us together. And I think in these times of shifting climate and changing landscapes, that's needed more than ever. And if bees can help unify us, then more power to them, right? So let me do share screen. And if you have questions, how about this? If you're able to put them in the chat, but I'll make time at the end to answer as many of them as I can. And that way, kind of streamline things here. Let me see, share screen, share sound. And hopefully my broadband will be okay. If it gets glitchy, then somebody pipe up and tell me, because I can't see the chat when I'm sharing. And I can stop it and turn off my video and then go on from there in case it gets a little glitchy. But, okay, come on, Chomps. My cat's name is Chomps, by the way, and he's meowing back there. So this is called Beekeepers United, and I call myself a self-proclaimed nectar nomad in that for 2 reasons. One is that I migrate with my bees even when within my own home area, a little 60-mile loop, which I'll talk about later. But my travels and getting to know beekeepers and bees all over feels quite nomadic and in a sense has broadened my horizons. I thought it was pretty funny when Peter said, somebody who really knows about beekeeping, and I put the funny face up because, the more I beekeep, the more I realize I don't know anything. So I definitely don't feel like an expert. I still feel very much a student for life of this, what I like to call artistic science or scientific art. So, okay, here's my little video introduction.
I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur to beings of sweet starlight. I migrate with them, like a shepherd, roaming with my flock of winged midwives, as a fellow follower of the bloom, a self-proclaimed nectar nomad. I was introduced The bees captivated my curious mind, and working in an outdoor office made of fresh air, flowers, and freedom enticed my soul. My nomadic journey as an apiculturist has taken me far from where I could ever have imagined, having come from a humble home in Pueblo Indian country in New Mexico. My heritage is a mosaic of cellular memories influenced by my Native American ancestors, who instilled in me a profound reverence for place and purpose, and to pursue acts of community service. I chose to become a bee farmer, as I wanted to continue to learn from Mother Nature and Father Time. As a farmer, I share beekeepers' voices of concern and need for adaptation and innovation to fulfill our dedication for local to global food production. Sharing their challenges, I became encouraged to return to academia to help quantify their observations and advocate for pollinator conservation. Now, as a researcher, my quest to better understand the relationship between cultures, food systems, and stewardship is at the forefront of my thoughts. Honeybees are like some of us and our ancestors, immigrants to this country. They have adapted and become the backbone of agriculture. There are distinct ecotypes or subspecies of honeybees like races in humans. And these ecotypes carry genetic histories like seeds, which contain their very existence and memories of creation. For within each one, they have the power to nurture and adapt, and the magnificence to create life, food, and medicine for the world. One of the things I most enjoy about beekeeping is that it bridges cultures and goes beyond borders. It connects us to our origins as fellow beings of light, as a part of this land, not separate from it. This magnificence is alluring and inspires me to find and connect with bees and their keepers around the globe. I invite you all to accompany me on my nectar nomad storytelling journey as I chase the bloom, encounter cultures, and follow the liquid starlight known as honey from flora to flavor to feast.
Okay, I hope that came through okay. And I realized why the cat was meowing was because I didn't open the door. So he was locked inside here with me. So I just let him out. But yeah, that gives you a little sort of background history. And I actually started beekeeping in 1997. I did the 6-year undergraduate plan, which happens to some of us. I'd actually gone off to school at University of Miami for a couple years and was doing marine biology fisheries. And being in a beach town coming from the desert of New Mexico, I had way too much fun. It was really amazing coming of age years. But after a couple of years, I sort of reevaluated and realized that I really wanted to value my education a little bit more than I had been, because I'd been, going to the beach all the time. And so I decided to sort of come back to New Mexico and regroup. And I ended up going to school at St. John's College, which is a great books program. I like to describe it to people as reading a lot of old dead people who are no longer alive. But its main focus is in philosophy, and the degree we graduate with is advanced liberal arts, but it's like 3 majors and 2 minors, everything from philosophy to literature and physics and fine art. And it really taught me how to learn, or learned how to learn, I should say, because as a student, when you're in school, we tend to just kind of absorb, or hopefully, absorb what's being taught to us. But doing self-guided learning was very new to me. And so I really realized that if there were things I wanted to learn more about, that it was basically my responsibility to go and seek that information. And so graduating with, my bachelor's with my book smarts, so to speak, I decided I really wanted to gain some street smarts or world smarts. And so I enlisted in the U.S. Peace Corps and was stationed in Calle Mill in Guairá in Paraguay for 2 years. And that was my first introduction to bees. I had no experience beforehand. In fact, I had been, wanting to move to San Francisco to be a DJ, and it was just getting going. And, I did the old fashioned go to the library, check out books, and make a few phone calls. The upper left photo is actually my best friend when I was in Peace Corps. She was 13 years old at the time. Now she's closer to 40. So, and those are the hills that I lived in. They were called Cerro de Ubaturusu. And Ubaturusu is a Guarani word. They're Guarani indigenous people there, which means wind from the hills. And so I was pretty excited because Paraguay is a landlocked country. It's very muggy and humid. It's subtropical and rather flat, but there are a few little mountains or hills, which is quite nice. The bottom right picture is actually me helping a beekeeper who was in Calle Dos Mills, so he lived another kilometer away. And it looks like a Langstroth box, but what's really interesting about the Paraguayans at that time, they wanted to look modern, right? They wanted to have modern things, but they couldn't necessarily afford the contemporary sort of equipment. And they didn't even have power tools, it was just a machete. So they would make boxes and have their top bars in there, but that was it. flash forward later, I realized, oh, that's a Warre system that they were running, but they wanted it from the outside to look very modern. The other style of hive that was predominantly used was top bar horizontal hive systems, which worked really well for the bees there, being that they were predominantly aggressive and Africanized. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later too. And this photo is pretty interesting because within it, I remember this day vividly because the house wasn't too far away, but they always kept their bees in a copse of trees. And part of that was because then we could weave, back to the house and hopefully lose the bees so that they wouldn't follow us to the house. And they'd bring all the kids in and all the animals. And we got back to the house and the wife realized that she'd forgotten a rooster outside. And so we went to look. They had these little A-frame kind of huts that he was hanging out in. And we looked at the rooster and his comb on his head was solid white because it was filled with stingers. And he was alive, but he was kind of like just frozen, it seemed. He wasn't moving, but he was alive. He was looking at us and he's standing upright. And I asked them, I said, what's going to happen? We should take those out. And they said, well, we don't know, and the next day they invited me over for chicken soup. So you can imagine how that went down. And it was tasty chicken soup. I remember actually being nervous, like, is there going to be a lot of venom in the meat, And I asked them, I said, did he die? And they said, no, he didn't die, but he didn't move. And so they thought they should put him out of his misery. But that was one of the more scarier sort of adventures I had while I was there working with those types of bees. So starting as a Peace Corps volunteer and having no background with bees, right? But then being able to grow from that, I ended up meeting a really good friend in Peace Corps. She grew up in Hawaii, and I ended up going out to Hawaii, where I worked for 5 years. I started at Hawaiian Queen first season, and I credit Michelle Crones, who ran Hawaiian Queen at that time. He taught me how to graft and introduced me to queen rearing. And then I switched over to Kona Queen, and I worked there for 4 seasons. And so I was on the island for a total of 5 years and really became more nuanced in just the whole process of queen rearing. But it was very interesting to go from a very rustic experience where we're catching wild our own equipment. We used to use coffee cans to make our own smokers, to all of a sudden factory farming USA, and I was very impressed with just how organized the commercial beekeeping enterprise was. I had no idea that it was that logistically cool, because it's all on a calendar. And I got to work with beekeepers from all over the world, which really gave me more insight into, the small scale and developing world approach to beekeeping, but then also, an industrialized world country, I should say, that was more advanced in their techniques. And so those experiences really allowed me to just keep learning. And I've always liked to be of service. So I was able, not too long ago, to volunteer for a couple terms as a farmer to farmer. And I recommend this program to people. It's through the USAID program. And they're always looking for beekeepers who have skills, and they don't pay you for your time, you're volunteering, but they do cover your costs. So they'll pay for your airfare, where you're staying, to driving you around. So I had the opportunity to go twice to Jamaica, and that's what the picture on the right is me doing some wax projects with some kids there. And I got to visit every parish in Jamaica and every bee club on that island, which was just amazing. And that really gave me, again, sort of going from small scale to large scale to back to small scale, and realizing just how integrative bees are with our larger food system. And so I started to become a little bit more, I guess I should say, introduced and participatory in this slow food organization, which some of you may have heard of. There's Slow Food International, but there's also slow food chapters around the US. And their whole approach is really to try and promote these artisanal products and the people who produce them, as opposed to, say, fast food, where you're, driving in real quick and getting processed meat burgers that, come from 1,000 cows. and that are 99 cents, right? So, and I'm not going to say what's better or worse, but this is just, wanting an organization that's wanting to really preserve these cultural aspects and traditions with food. So just as a snapshot, these are some of the places I've been able to go to, and I'm based in New Mexico. So hopefully you can see my cursor here. That's where this little middle spot is. And actually, after I worked in Hawaii, I went to work so I started in Hive, right down here in South America, and then went up to work in Hawaii. Then I actually had the opportunity I went from Paraguay to Mexico and then Mexico, Hawaii. And then after I was on the island, I went back to Paraguay to be a trainer for new volunteers and realized that if I really wanted to keep traveling, that being on an island in the middle of the South Pacific was going to be pretty challenging because it was so costly. And so I moved back to the mainland, but I worked actually at NMSU at New Mexico State University in the financial aid office. And I was the clerk at the window that had to tell these, stressed students that, no, I'm sorry, your student loans haven't come in or your Pell Grant hasn't come in. And I was under these fluorescent lights that just gave me headaches. And I would go out, every break I got, I would go out to the duck pond. And I realized, I still really want to work with bees. And I had been putting off grad school because my mother, who's an educator, had been reminding me regularly, why not grad school? But I had realized that, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to really specialize in. Did I want to do international development? Did I want to do, sustainable agriculture or food systems? Did I want to do, this, that, or the other, anthropology? And so I wasn't quite sure which direction I wanted to go. And at that point in time, things were still very sort of siloed. Disciplines were very separated. So I put it off. And so I ended up finding a job in Florida working for a migratory operator. He's actually based in Wisconsin, but he would spend his winters in Florida. And so I ended up going there and got to learn about packaged bee production. So, I got the rustic experience in South America and Mexico, and then got to do, large scale queen production. And then now got to start learning about, making starter nuclei and packages and even cut comb honey and varietal honey products, which was really, really interesting. And that's where I met my farm partner, Mark Spitzig. He's actually a Yooper from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But his story was he started with a couple books and a couple friends and 2 packages of bees. And a few years later, the friends kind of drifted onto other projects, and he was standing there. He went from 2 units to 5 units to 17, hives of he didn't know what. He said there were swarms hanging from the trees. And he was like, I got to go work for a professional. And so he ended up going to work for the guy he originally got the bees from, which was this gentleman, Gary Oreskovich of Honeyland Farms, who's the migratory operator in Florida. So we met working for that beekeeper in Florida. And I was actually slated to go to New Zealand afterwards to go work, because having been in Hawaii and getting the opportunity to work with beekeepers from all over, because they would come during their cold season, right? So beekeepers from Canada would go to Hawaii for winter and work, and beekeepers from South America, like Chile and Argentina, would come up during their winter to work, and then they'd all go back to their respective countries during their own bee season. I started to realize that this was a skill that could, allow you to travel. And in Michigan over New Zealand, and Mark had 50 hives at the time. I still had none. I just had only worked for people who had bees, but I never had my own. But we teamed up, and I actually spent a whole year up there in Michigan in a little dome off the grid. And we took his 50 hives, which he had mainly done honey production. He sold all his honey to the local food co-op, Marquette Food Co-op. And I ended up helping him multiply them. So we doubled the numbers, and then we took them back to Florida the next winter. And we did that a couple times. And then somehow I convinced him, why don't we bring him to New Mexico? That's my home state. But I had never had bees in my home area. And so we learned together, and he was, of course, convinced that they were all going to turn Africanized and that it was going to be super hot desert. Well, he found out, that New Mexico is where the Rockies meet the plains and the desert. So we have everything from desert to tundra here. Our lowest point of elevation is 2,900 feet, and our highest point of elevation is, 13,000 some. I'm right now in Santa Fe, which is at 7,000 foot elevation, and my farm is an hour, 15 minutes north, and that's at 8,300 feet. So we get pretty intense weather scenarios here because of that confluence of all the different topographies. And it took us a while to figure out how to do things, but we've been able to take, and then, we've had different projects or invitations to do bees in different places. I got to go do some beekeeping in Nicaragua to teach some classes. And I was able to also go to British Columbia. And then I ended up deciding to go to grad school actually a couple of years ago. But my travels have taken me all over, and I felt really blessed to be able to have interacted with bees and their keepers in all these places. And I really hope to go to more places too. But seeing all of these bees and all of these beekeepers in these different places really opened my eyes to the broader world of genetics, but even more so to epigenetics, right? So, genetics is this coding that we have within us, but epigenetics is looking at the environment that helps to shape that coding, or which turns on or off that coding, right? So depending on where we're located, we have genes that will either turn on or turn off depending on what the external circumstances are that we're experiencing. And I really became quite fascinated in that because while bees are very similar, especially honeybees, which I'll talk about a little bit in terms of the subspecies in the next slide, there's still a distinct specificity when we look at location, right? So what's happening even between Southern California and Northern California is very different, right? Even though it's one state. So these are pictures from my home area. The one on the left is me pulling honey from right along the Rio Grande. That's actually not the Rio Grande in the background. That's a little ditch, but the river's behind that apple orchard. Those are those big trees in the background. And then the picture on the right is actually up at the home farm in Truchas, New Mexico, which means trout. So there's a lot of trout fishing, there's elk, there's bear. It's really, really pretty up there. And so we do this little migratory loop, which is about 60 miles between the lowlands and the highlands. And it's only 60 miles because there's a lot of curves because you're going around mountains and canyons and stuff. I think if it was as the crow flies, it's probably only about 20 miles. But we're able to, in a good year, capture several different flows. And the reason we've chosen to be sort of, move them is because New Mexico is a pretty challenging state with those microclimates. So not every location is a guarantee. It all depends on rain. And if we don't get rain or it doesn't come at the right time, then there's just no flow. And so instead of trying to force my bees to stay in one spot that maybe, they'd starve for part of the year and I'd have to feed them, I'd prefer to, burn fossil fuel and put them on the truck and take them maybe 30 minutes down the road, but then it's totally different environment. And they hopefully get diverse nutrition, but it also within our breeding program, I'm able to test out different stock lines and really sort of see which of these bees or bee families or lines is adaptable. So let's flash back a little bit of history here since we're talking about queens and hives, but there's close to 30 recognized subspecies of Apis mellifera. And, there's actually fossil evidence of a native honeybee to the Americas, to North America. It was actually found in Nevada about 14 million years ago. That fossil was embedded, and it was found more recently, and it's called Apis mellifera nearctica. So while we tend to think of honeybees as exotics or brought over by colonizers, right? There was actually a cousin to honeybees that did exist here, just like horses. Horses were here on this continent too. And then there was an ice age event and, kind of wiped them out. So I like to think of honeybees and horses as being reintroduced. But when settlers came, a few were brought over, not all the different kinds were brought over, but a few were brought over. And then as they started to adapt and really proliferate, they became, they started to expand on their own, but then also as settlers started expanding westward, right? They were bringing bees with them. And as the Spanish were also there too, prior to when additional Europeans showed up. So it's very interesting that, the bees as generalist pollinators, honeybees, we've got 4,000 various bee species here in North America, over 20,000 globally. And then, within that, there's Apis mellifera is one of those 4,000 here in this country, but there's close to 30 recognized subspecies in general of Apis mellifera. And so it's interesting to see which ones were brought over, and there's a lot of historical records, but not all of them were recorded. It was a really hard and arduous trip, right? So, everybody coming on a ship, you lost livestock, whatever you're bringing over. And then as bees started to expand, the importation of them really slowed down. Then in the 1920s, the border was shut due to the Isle of Wight disease, which was actually tracheal mite. And so they shut the borders, and that law still exists on the books today. So that's why we don't have bees coming in from all over. They opened it briefly in 2005 for Australian packages. And then next thing you know, CCD hit. So they shut that border again. Whether those two things are related or not, that's still up for discussion. However, then steamboats arrived and a few more were brought over. This was before the 20s, but then in the 20s, they shut that border. So that really kind of stopped the flow of genetic material or diverse genetic material, but bees were expanding. And when you look at quote unquote the old world, or Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, bees had thousands upon thousands of years with each other, but they've become distinct subspecies or ecotypes because they've really adapted to a particular landscape, right? And so you have Apis mellifera ligustica, which we know is, we call those Italian, Apis mellifera caucasica, which is Caucasian, Apis mellifera carniola, Apis mellifera iberiensis, sahariensis, the list goes on. So it's very interesting that in the States, we don't have those ecotypes, and especially because as we started expanding and industrialized agriculture really started to grow, we haven't allowed this reintroduced, fraction of bees to become their own ecotypes yet. We've just been moving them left and right, pretty much willy-nilly, without really allowing them time to adapt on their own. I'm going to talk about the importance of that in a minute. And so how can we use this adaptation, which we are sort of curbing here in the States, but how can it lead to innovation in terms of, how then do we manage our bees? And a lot of that is, we have migratory beekeepers now. You all see it in California, thousands upon thousands of beekeepers bringing, trucking in bees for the almond pollination. And that's one way that we've sort of adapted, right? But is it a positive way? Not necessarily. So we have higher losses, right? Due to a variety of issues. We have changing climate, loss of habitat. There's a really good story that came out on NPR. I want to say maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4. This is Eric Olson. He's now retired, but he was a big operator out of Oregon. And I'll never forget hearing his presentation. One of the first presentations I heard him do at a Western Apicultural Society conference in Seattle. I think it was maybe in 2012. And he got up and he said, "Nobody tells you how emotional beekeeping is." He said, "When my bees are really good, I'm on top of the world. But when my bees are doing poorly, I'm miserable." And he's a big burly guy. So to hear him say that was really poignant because we don't talk about that. We don't necessarily, I think we all feel for our bees, especially when we lose them, but we don't talk about that emotional roller coaster of what keeping bees is. And how can we adapt to that? And how can we become more innovative in our approach so that we don't have those types of roller coaster emotions with our bees and with our beekeeping? And a lot of that comes down to stock selection, but also habitat revitalization. And so within my own breeding program, I used to use the word survivor, but there's not a firm definition of it. People use it, however they want. So I've come to now really call it a more longevity-based breeding program. So my selection is based on multiple trait selection and looking at them over time. And so in a sense, I call it Mother Nature or Father Time tested, Mother Nature approved, because I'm just allowing the natural world and time to really test the bees, and in these varying environments that I'm sharing with. And so using that as a premise to develop into more collaborative approaches, because it's one thing to be your own small scale breeder in your area, but it's another thing to try and develop a community of breeders who are like-minded and who are wanting to try and develop their own adaptive or ecotype, right, that can work well in their area. Really takes a community for sure. So through several different grant-funded projects, Western SARE is one of them. We were able to do a couple of breeding projects with beekeepers. That photo on the left is actually of what we call the Rocky Mountain Survivor Queenbee Cooperative. And we actually spanned close to 500 miles, went through 7 counties, and through 2 states, from Santa Fe, New Mexico, up to Fort Collins, Colorado. And it was a bittersweet experience, because we had, not everybody's on the same page, not everybody had the same level of experience, but we all wanted to try and share our quality stock. And it went pretty well. And then we found that, there were certain people who kind of, wanted more than they were able to give. So we ended up dividing the groups. And the following year, I just focused with the New Mexico beekeepers, and the Colorado beekeepers did their own thing the following year. But it ended up being really inspirational, because all of us are still breeding bees in some way, shape, or form to this day. And then also working with various institutions. So I did a little bit of research with New Mexico State University. We have a particular strain that's endemic to New Mexico. And so we were looking at that for pollinator health. It actually has a lot of pinene, but also has a lot of thymol and carvacrol. So there's so many pollinators who are on it. And the farmer who grows it was like, I think they're self-medicating, like they want it because they know it's good for them. So we teamed up with NMSU to look at that. And we should have a paper coming out about that soon. Eventually, our chemist who had been working on it suddenly retired. So that kind of tabled it for about 1.5 years, but we're picking it back up. And then working with various organizations. Seeds of Change used to have a really lovely farm here in northern New Mexico. They don't anymore. They got bought out by Mars, but still working with various organizations. And my observations were really kind of what led me to want to understand more what I was seeing. I also I call it my protagonist-antagonist story with Dr. Shepard, who's my advisor at Washington State University. So I'd seen him at a conference here in Albuquerque, and I was, telling him about my breeding program, which, is now going on its 20th year. But he said, well, where's the data? And I said, oh, I've got notebooks, and he said, that's a case study. He said, and case studies are irrelevant in science. And of course, my mouth dropped, because that's somebody telling you your life's work is irrelevant, right? But he really did become the protagonist, because, a few months later, he called me up and said, because I told him I was thinking of going to grad school. He called me up and said that he could offer me a graduate assistantship. So I really appreciate him giving me the opportunity to go back to school. And one of the reasons I wanted to go back to school was because of that incident, because I realized we speak different languages. Farmers and beekeepers in the field speak very different language than academics and scientists, right? And we need translators. We need to be able to communicate. Farmers have these practices and these observations that are very true, but how can they quantify it so that then scientists can understand it? And also, how can scientists who, they work so hard on their research, and then they only get a little blurb, published a little paper, and it's forgotten. And they want their work to be meaningful and to be impactful and to be positive to the end stakeholder. So how can we better, unite to sort of develop research, but also queries and just approaches, best management practices so that it's a win-win for both. And so that was really my impetus for going back to school, was because I realized we needed translators. And if I could better learn the scientific language, then not only could I help to quantify my own observations, but my end goal is to really help quantify other beekeepers' observations, which are just as valid. But if we can complement it with that scientific approach, then it can be better understood all around. So yeah, I went back to school. I'm finishing up the semester with my master's. I just, since I've been out of school for 20 some years, and when I put off grad school after Peace Corps, I thought it would just be for maybe 3 years, and it ended up turning into 20. So I decided I needed to test the waters, but I am hoping at some point to possibly continue and get a doctorate. And I think the timing really worked for me because I had my field credentials now, right? I had my field smarts, but I also was now better able to recognize, like, yeah, this is what I really want to do and what I want to use it for. And I also realized that I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. I also realized that, if I had gone to school back, in the late 90s, things would have been still very compartmentalized, and I probably would have been very miserable. But now there's a real big and also encouragement to do interdisciplinary work, which is really what I like, is the fact that we can combine, the sciences with the arts and the humanities to better understand and gain a more holistic understanding of bees and also food systems and stewardship, right? So my research, and I think I don't know if let me go back a second here. Oh, it won't let me. Anyways, let me show you here. So these are little RFID units using radio frequency, and I put a little tag on the back of the queens, virgin queens, and I was looking at different subspecies and then trying to see if they all go out and mate at the same time or if there's differences in their mating. So this was actually my first year of running the research, which you can see all these cords in the background, which were electric. No data then. That was the summer of 2018. It just never got recorded, or what did get recorded was incomplete. So the following year, I was able to apply for a grant from the California State Beekeepers. So thanks to those of you who are members of your state association. And I was able to receive funding to double the numbers. So I had 10 units there, but then I was able the following year to do 20 and to solarize everything. So now they run off of solar power, and we're able to put them out in the field where there's not electricity, which is really awesome. And I'm still crunching through those numbers. But yeah, you can see up here, you can see the little RFID tag that I put on the queen. And so this is a Caucasian queen WSU breeding program, and this is an Italian queen that actually came from Jackie Parks and her Italian breeding program. And while I was at school, I was able to actually go to what's called Terra Madre with Slow Food. I mentioned Slow Food earlier, and able to visit beekeepers in Italy and in France. Also had the opportunity in the upper left, I got to visit beekeepers in Morocco, which was amazing. This is actually this top photo here of a bee yard is actually near the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And this was during the dearth. And the beekeepers there were saying that they work their bees at night because they're so feisty. And we went, of course, during the day because, we wouldn't be able to see anything at night. And they suited up and we went to go look at the bees. And I went to the car to get something, and I came back and I forgot to put my veil on. And I started looking at the bees. And of course, they were just amazed, like, you're not getting stung. And I said, no, I'm like, you guys say they're mean, but they're really not mean. And so they all wanted to take pictures with their veils off and holding their bees, which they had never done before. And I just thought it was amazing because it really was quite the dearth. You could see the bloom is pretty done there. But I also got to see the hives on the top of Notre Dame before there was the fire. But they survived, which is good. This is Kenton Jayant, and I don't know if any of you have heard of him yet. He's his dad founded Beekeeping in out of Versailles, and they actually now have an American base in Martinez, so near Oakland, California. They have an American shop, which is still, I think, called Beekeeping USA. Middle bottom are two other beekeepers. One on the far right, that's Ange Roll, and Ange runs They Keep Bees, which is a non-binary beekeeping business based in Massachusetts. And Ange and Bee, which is their partner, they actually go down to Florida as well. So they're a little migratory operation. There's also Jennifer Holmes here in the middle. She's based in Florida, and she was the Florida State Beekeeper Association president for a number of years. While I was in Italy, got to really, luckily through Slow Food, was able to meet some beekeepers who I was staying an extra 5 days. And so they gave me this impromptu tour, and I got to visit like 5 different beekeepers all around Piemonte in the northern part of Italy, which was amazing. This is Luca Buzzoni here in the upper left, who's your quintessential looking beekeeper, right? The second picture in, this is actually a really good friend of mine. I've kept in touch with this family. This is Barbara Leda and Maximiliano Gotti, who is my my tour guide. And this is one of their workers. But they're married, but they each have their own honey operation. So they share equipment and everything, but they have their 2 distinct lines of honey, which I thought was pretty cute. And when I asked them about it, they said, well, that way we don't have arguments. So I'm like, that's the way to do it. This is Alexander here with his wife, and he actually has a really cool breeding program with his Italian strain of bees. This is Eloise, and this is Raphael, actually. There's Maximilian in the background. But this is actually a queen excluder where they'll put their queen in, because it's Mediterranean climate and she won't quit brooding. They will confine her to a cage so they can break the brood cycle. And so I got to see a variety of mating nukes. This gentleman right here, you can hear him talk a little bit here. This is Elio Bonfante, and he runs something called Beenomics, which is a mite resistant breeding program.
Ma ero in ferie?
Cavolo, in ferie. Oggi dove
L'ho sentito ieri,
l'hai sentito?
per la Francia, sì.
Viene, no?
Ha detto di sì, però ha detto che aspetta te perché forse volevi venire anche tu,
No,
e quindi...
ma poi alla fine...
Vabbè, ma ha detto che mi dice
Lui
venire.
viene di sicuro.
So the woman talking was actually Chiara Concari, who's a wonderful tour guide too, and she speaks English very well. She's a translator, and she's the editor of Lapis, which is my hope is at some point from my travels to be able to organize smaller tour groups when things get back to normal, right, where we can go and visit beekeepers and really share in the experience, and maybe have some of them come here and visit us too. Kind of getting towards to wrap up here because I want to leave some time for questions, but I was pretty lucky in that I had this idea and I wanted to apply for Fulbright. So while I was at WSU, I applied for it, and I was actually only chosen as an alternate, but for the semifinalists, they gave us the opportunity to apply for what they called an Enhancement Award through National Geographic. And so I was able to get that, which allowed me to get the Fulbright and also have this Enhancement Award. And so this is a picture of me with the 3 other women on my cohort. They usually pick 5 people, but I think the 5th person wasn't able to join, and we're all from various disciplines. This is Madison Robley in the front with the gray skirt. She works on water access and water security, and she's from Missouri, but she got to go to Nepal for her research. There's myself. I got to go to Spain, which I'll show some pictures of, and look at the endemic honeybees there, Apismilifera iberiensis. The blonde with full and black in the back is Emmy Koch, and she's actually from Southern California. She's a professional surfer. She's an oceanographer, and she works a lot looking at small fishing villages. Throughout her surfing adventures, she realized the impacts of commercial fishing and also tourism on these smaller fishing villages. And so she's got a nonprofit called Beyond the Surface that really works to bring awareness to the plight of small fishermen villages, and also allow those folks in those communities to share their own stories through a process called Photo Voice, which is pretty cool. And then over here on the right, with the beautiful necklace, that is Aaliyah Pierce, and she's a spoken word poet. She's actually from New Jersey. She teaches at Rutgers, And she, with her project, she went to Trinidad and Tobago, which is part of her ancestral heritage, and did poetry slams and gathered stories, oral traditions all around Carnival in that part of the world. And I mentioned them, and I'm telling you their stories because despite us having these very distinct backgrounds, we've really bonded. And so we have a couple projects that we've pitched to Nat Geo that once things get back to normal, we really hope to do, which, our hope actually is to go to various countries and through our different disciplines, really learn more about our varying aspects. And so one of the countries we're hoping to go to is Ethiopia. So we'll see if we get that opportunity when things get back to normal. But yeah, to the topic at hand, Beekeepers United, being able to meet beekeepers. If any of you have the opportunity to go to Apimondia, it was in Montreal a couple Septembers ago. I think the next one was supposed to be in Russia, but it got tabled because of COVID. And it was to be Chile, but I did see a email come out that they're going to try and have it in person. I didn't get to open the email yet, so I can't remember now if it's still going to be in Russia, or if they're just going to move it to China. But, getting 10,000 beekeepers from all around the world in one spot really does bring to light, just how different we are, but how our love of this, fuzzy, little angel really, really fascinates so many people around the world. So that's Maximilio Gotti, my Italian beekeeper friend. He's actually a beekeeping extension agent. And then the Spanish beekeepers that I then got to go and work with, I only got to spend 4 months out of my 9 that I was going to be in Spain at, the pandemic hit. And I was just about to start my field research there. So I had to come back unexpectedly, but I'm still in touch with them, and I'm hoping to go back and visit. And they're just wonderful folks. This is Antonio Vasquez, Angel Diaz, and Fernando Molero. And they're all Andalusian beekeepers, so from the south of Spain. And yeah, kind of, that my whole project there was, having worked now with these bees in the States that we, are a reflection of us as Americans. They're a part of the melting pot, right? They're a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I really wanted to kind of see what bees were like in their own home area, at least a strain that had really adapted there. So Spain is really interesting because it's really a diverse place culturally. They were conquered new. Their cultural tapestry is quite fascinating. And not only that, even geographically, they've got the coast, they've got that Mediterranean. But then when you go to the northern part, it's like England. It's very cool and brisk. The deserts in between. And so I was able to coordinate my visit with a group called COAG, which is Coordinadores Organizados de Agricultura y Ganadería, which just means Coordinated Organization of Farmers and Ranchers, which is a non-governmental organization, but they have one for each sector, whether you're growing wine or ham or olives or honey. So here's some pictures from Spain. I didn't get to go see the Cueva de las Arañas, which is where the Man of Beacor is, which has the painting of the honey hunters, the oldest known cave painting of honey hunting. I was getting ready to go in April, and I had to leave March 14th, so I didn't get to go. But this is a replica that this particular beekeeper's niece did, and he just said he loved it because she painted it on this slab of rock that's actually in the shape of Spain. So he was really proud of that. This is actually Alonso Panadero. He's a baker. And so he bakes during the week, and then he beekeeps on the weekends and uses this honey for his bakery. This gentleman here processes a lot of wax for beekeepers, and he has a little museum, so you can see all the different sort of artifacts he has, and look at all these different kinds of honeys. They have everything from cilantro honey to oak honey to eucalyptus, avocado, rosemary, all different kinds of honey. COLOS, for those of you who haven't heard, is an international consortium of bee researchers and bee enthusiasts, and they do a lot. They're all volunteers, and so they actually had a meeting in Spain, and I was able to go to Toledo, so that's what you see in the background there is Toledo. But these are all European beekeepers The picture on the far right is actually of Sierra Nevada in Granada and their almond bloom, which is pretty cool. That's my friend Barbara Leila on the bottom, the Italian beekeeper. And there's Angel and Antonio, beekeeping friends, which is what I really come to find is that the camaraderie, just bees in general will build that. They'll build those friendships. One of the things I'm kind of fascinated with, or I shouldn't say kind of, I'm super fascinated with, one of my first loves is clay and pottery. And so within apiculture, there's actually, on the square picture on the right, that's my advisor when he was much younger, in Egypt, and the clay tube hives where they keep bees. And so I'm looking forward to replicating some of those here stateside. My new day job is as the extension educator at the Institute of American Indian Arts. We have a wonderful studio arts program. So I'll be doing some clay building of hives this summer. And really, just to kind of round it out, this synthesis between stewardship and conservation and curation, between our own observations and our own education and our evolving skills, to really help us to better understand, and to bring history to culture, adaptation to innovation, and our present to the future. So one of the final thoughts I'd like to leave you with are that seeds that can endure. I look at, bees are the seeds themselves, and their stories are quite magnificent. And those that are enduring are really worth saving and are worth sharing with each other. So here's a few other stories that I've done on Story Maps, ArcGIS, and I'm still adding some more from my travels, but here's some links, and you guys will have this recording and you can check those out at your leisure if you'd like. So yeah, I think this is my final slide. What's funny is that, so this image here, this is timely. I finally got to do my very first art installation. So I have an art installation going on in Taos, New Mexico right now. And it just came out in the paper, so I'll share the link with you all. But it's involving these glass heads that I put inside my beehives a number of years ago, and they built comb in it. So it's definitely a collaborative art. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry, my email, you can't really see my emails, but my farm email is queenbees@hotmail.com, and you can also reach me at melanie.kirby@Fulbright Mail. So thank you all, and I hope I've left a few minutes for questions here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so thanks for listening to me this evening, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you're. You're very welcome. Very, very welcome. Look here in the chat. I see. So someone says, "I'm a beginner. I don't know have a hive. What is brood?" So brood is the babies or the developing young. So when we talk about the brood chamber, that's where the queen is laying the eggs, and where the nursery is. I like to call it the nursery, but that's where you're going to find the nurse bees, or which are worker bees, but they're the younger set of worker bees. So as bees are born, females, which would come from fertilized eggs, are go through this varying job roles. And the first few days, they're just housekeeping. They're keeping, the hive clean, getting used to the smells. And then their hypopharyngeal glands kick in, and then they're able to start producing royal jelly. And then they can start to feed developing young, so larvae and the brood. That's what we call the brood. Let's see. We would love to link to your paper in a future newsletter. Most definitely. Yes, I'll be very happy to share that with everybody. And yeah, I usually come out to California actually in the early spring to do breeding projects with people. One of our main collaborators is Aidan Wing, and he's based in, between Pescadero and Los Altos Hills. And he runs his bees through that area. Usually I get to go out there at least once a year, but I didn't get to this year, which I just figured my farm partner is just now coming back from being out there. So he called me about an hour before this presentation and was like, "I'm an hour outside of Albuquerque." So yeah, but it's nice to be able to collaborate like that, talking about Beekeepers United. We're a smaller operation. Aiden's a smaller operation. And when we can team up at those strategic times of the year and help each other get our initial splits made and our first rounds of queens made, and we can share that with our communities, it really it's really helpful, and it alleviates a level of stress, because the larger operations, they didn't all start large, right? They started at some point and then they were able to grow, but a lot of them have these massive crews to just keep everything going like clockwork, which is really impressive. But it's also, then they're able to pass it on to the next generation if they want, so you have these multi-generational beekeeping operations. But for those of us who are, I consider myself a first generation beekeeper, we had to build everything out of pocket. And we've had, just like other people, we've had good years and bad years. 2011, we lost 40% of our hives to bears actually in August, which we didn't, you normally, if we lose bees to bears, it's like September or October, but we've also learned we keep everything behind hot wire, but we had been so spoiled and we hadn't had to do that. But 2011, there was a huge wildfire in Los Alamos. I don't know if folks remember hearing about it. And we were 50 miles from there, but all that smoke flew to our mountain range. I was pregnant with my son at the time. And so I even had to go downstate to get away from the smoke. And we decided to keep the bees in the valley mostly that summer because at least people were still irrigating for alfalfa. Well, that fire wiped out all that vegetation and those bears had nothing to eat. So they came down early and they hit 14 different apiaries that we had. We lost over $10,000 in beekeeping equipment, which for us as small operators was devastating. And we lost some prized breeding stock, and we thought, well, should we, just go buy a bunch of packages and kind of rebuild, or should we try and rebuild what we have? And we chose to rebuild off of what we have because we were really trying to work with our regionally fortified genetics. And then flash forward a few years, we started this collaboration with Aiden, which is going, I think, almost now in its 9th or 10th year, where we've been mentoring him and he's been able to put on his own. And then we collaborate at certain times of the year. And so he has some of our stock, we have some of his stock, and we're able to test each other's stock out, which is really nice. So let's see, didn't working with Africanized bees alter your feelings about bees? I'll be honest with you, Africanized bees are awesome. They are magnificent. They're super productive. They're highly pest disease resistant. They are no nonsense. However, as a breeder, I don't want them. I don't necessarily I like going out to work my bees in, t-shirt and sandals. And also as a smaller operator, I'm not selling, tens of thousands of queens. I am selling to, backyard beekeepers, to urban beekeepers. Topography to isolate ourselves and to really protect our breeding program. But I get nervous because, Santa Fe and Albuquerque are not that far away. There's no way we can supply our whole area with bees. And so you have a lot of unsuspecting beekeepers who are very well-intentioned. They want to work with bees. They want to, promote, the beauty of bees and to help save the bees. But then bring in pests, and they don't realize that they're changing the genetic pool that we have here. So I write a letter every year to the Department of Ag. I write a letter every year to our state association. I write a letter every year in a little local sustainability mag, just trying to bring awareness to that, we need to be really considerate of what we're bringing in. And that doesn't apply just to bees. That's on everything, right? I'm not saying close the borders by any means, but let's just be mindful of what we are bringing in, how that's impacting our local bees. Do I have any beginning beekeeper advice? Enjoy the journey. You'll have some ups and downs. Great for being involved in a club. I think local community efforts are super paramount to beekeeping success, because you can find local mentors. You can also bounce back and forth with each other, like different patterns, or if things are different each year, help to share resources. But yeah, just enjoy the journey. I feel like I figured bees out. They humble me pretty quick and let me know that I haven't figured it out. So I just still learn so much each season. Every season's different. Every hive has its own personality. So, well, awesome. So Wyatt just asked me a question. wants to get started with this hobby. Any tips or advice for kids? Yeah, well, I would say if you're interested, then yeah, I think there's something to be said about being exposed to beekeeping. I got exposed in my early 20s. I could only imagine, if I had been exposed earlier. I will say this as a joke, my kids I have a 12-year-old now and a 9-year-old. And what's funny is that Mark, my farm partner, who's their dad, when people say, oh, how cool, your kids get to grow up on a bee farm. And he'll say, are you kidding? I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. and again, it kind of taps into that, what I mentioned about Eric Olson, a big beekeeper in Oregon, that nobody tells you how emotional it's going to be, but there's some really wonderful life lessons to learn, right? There's wonderful biological lessons to learn with bees and seasonal lessons to learn about the cycle of life and the waxing and waning of things. And there's also something to be said about, relishing in that relationship that you nurture with your bees, especially when you get to taste honey from the hive, or make lip balms with your own wax. It's really, really, I think, a wonderful experience. So for kids and bees, I don't know if you all have heard of Sarah Red Laird. She does a lot with kids and bees and kids and bee programming. She's the beegirl.org. But check out 4-H if you have 4-H program near you. I think also Boy Scouts might have recently brought back beekeeping as a badge. But if you're interested, find if your parent's a beekeeper or if you through your bee club, and maybe you can offer to help and they can take you out and just suit up. I always tell people, make sure you feel really comfortable. My first several years of beekeeping, I was fully suited up, and especially being in South America with really aggressive strains, we'd duct tape any hole. And it wasn't until I went to work in Hawaii where we weren't allowed to wear gloves because we were handling queens that then my technique evolved. And so now I only wear gloves when I have to move bees at night because they get crawly. But just make sure you're protected. That way you're comfortable and you're relaxed, and you can really get to experience the marvel of bees. Let's see. Do I have any preference to subspecies? I think all of them are pretty cool. I will say this, that for my area specifically, because I'm high elevation, I really like Caucasian cross bees because they're really winter hardy and they're very conservative too. So they don't. They know when to shut off their brooding. They won't keep brooding. I've had some beautiful Italians, but then they're still brooding up and then they run out of honey before the next spring flow comes. And we always get late frost. We've had snow here as late as June 14th. People don't put their plants out until after Mother's Day because we can still get late frost. So like today, I think we were upper mid 60s, but at night we're still getting frost. So I really like having winter hardy bees. But depending on where you're at, that might be different, right? So, but check out wingsofnaturebees.com. That's Aiden's operation, and he's been working. He got a grant from SARE as well, from Sustainable Agriculture Research Education, to work on developing or nurturing, an ecotype that works good for Northern California and the Bay Area. So that might be a good resource for you. I'll put his website here in the chat. I want to leave you guys with one thing, which is actually Saturday. I've put together a bee breeding webinar. It's called Adaptive Bee Breeding, Techniques and Philosophies for the Future. And it's featuring 11 queen producers from across the US, a couple from California and a couple from Oregon. And then we've got from Texas, North Dakota, Florida, New York, and Massachusetts and Maryland and New Mexico, of course, where I'm at. And I'm going to put the link for that in the chat in case you're interested. And we do have some scholarships available. Let me see here, just so I can give you the full website that has all the bios of all the producers who are on there. But it's on Saturday, and we are going to record it. So even if you can't attend the session live, you might want to consider registering, and then we'll send you the link. And yeah, share that with you there in case you're interested. So the first half will be talking about different breeding concepts, like just what it is. For me, as somebody who started as just, working as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then I went down that rabbit hole of queen rearing and queen production and got really kind of fascinated with genetics and epigenetics. There's always that thing where you go, I wish I knew then what I know now, right? And the truth of it is, when someone said, what's a suggestion for starting, is really that, finding bees that work good in your area will really make a difference. Sometimes people just go by price or they go by what's convenient, but really looking more at what kind of bees they are and how they're produced, because there can be really good genetics, but maybe they're squashed because they're produced in a non-conducive way. And part of it is I describe to people like fruit. You can have ripe fruit that you pluck and it's delicious, or you can pluck unripe fruit. You can ship it halfway around the world and it's still unripe. And it's the same with the bees. We can't change how fast they are a larva or that they go through their pupation, but producers will harvest them at different times. And if they harvest them too early, then there's a higher rate of supersedure on the other end. And so if they start early in the season, then they're not going to be well mated because there weren't enough drones, right? So all of those play into the quality of the queen, which then affects her longevity and also, the longevity of the hive. So I would say just don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you don't know what you're asking about, just ask them. What do you feed your bees? What are you medicating them? When do you medicate them? Because a lot of times you may get bees and think, I want to do treatment-free beekeeping, but maybe you're starting with bees that have been on a chemical treadmill for generations. And, you're going to be disappointed when they don't survive, but that's because those bees were not selected for endurance, right? So it's good to do that research. Thank you so much, you all. And I know I've gone over a little bit on time, so I'm so sorry. The webinar starts at, it'll be 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time.